In this video, I'm going to give you solutions to the most common mistakes that I see in squatting. Hinge squatting, shoving the knees out, butt wink. The reasons people turn a squat into a hinge can be innumerable, but for simplicity, I'm just going to focus on a few reasons. Reason number one would be weak quads. So the quadriceps is a muscle that creates knee extension, but in a squat, it has an extra purpose. Its job is to control the opposite of knee extension, which is knee flexion. So it has to be able to volitionally control every ounce of working range. If you can't do that, the body is excellent at compensating. What do I mean by that? Instead of using the knees to descend into the bottom position, the body will get a compensatory torso lean. The degree of your torso angle directly relates to the amount of tension placed on the quads. The taller you are, the more is on the quads, and the more bent you are, the more is on the hips. So what you can see with a torso lean compensation for a hingy squat, people will lose that torso and shift everything to the hips. If you look at competitive powerlifters, oftentimes they won't even get that true knee flexion. What do we do for weak quads? Reverse treadmill for top end knee extension concentrically. When I push this belt forward, I'm extending the knee in a functional position. Harlequin step for top end knee extension eccentrically. ATG split squat for bottom end knee extension. And then finally VMO squat for mid-range knee extension. All of these movements force the body to become exceptional at creating volitional control at the knee joint with a vertical torso at every possible strength curve of the quadriceps. Reason number two, people hinge squat actually goes into mistake number two, which is improper cueing. So oftentimes coaches will coach their clients to grip the floor with their feet and spread their knees out. This is all in lieu of getting more glute activation. The problem with that is that it is not considering the arthrokinematics of the femur and what that does to the glutes. Arthrokinematics is a fancy science term meaning joint movement. We need some help from Alfred to explain. When you go into a squat, you need to have hip flexion, knee flexion, and ankle dorsiflexion to reach full range. At the hip joint specifically, true hip flexion on the pelvis, an anterior roll, which is the head of the femur, rolling to the front of its socket, and then we need a posterior glide. But when you grip the floor with your feet, you're actually creating a relative external rotation moment of the femur on the pelvis. What's the big deal with that? When you externally rotate the femur, the opposite occurs, and the hip gets shoved anterior. When you do this, there's less room for the hip to move when you get into flexion. And down the chain, this will actually create external rotation of the tibia on the femur, which directly limits the amount of knee flexion you can get. Because to get full knee flexion, we need the tibia to internally rotate before descending down. So with this cueing, there's actually less room for the hip to move because you're literally cueing the tissues on the back side of the hip that are responsible for moving to let the hip go posterior contracted. And when they're contracted, there's no room to move, which is why you see people squatting with these forms have very exaggerated wide stance and oftentimes a hingy squat. And that hingy squat is the torso bending to compensate. Alfred's torso doesn't bend, or I would demonstrate it, but this exacerbates the potential for a butt wink, which I'll go into shortly. So what's the solution? Hips directly back, bend the knees, don't flare your ribs, don't lead with the back, but lead with the hips, all the while making sure you are not spreading the floor. This will ensure you're getting optimal flexion moments down the chain. Hip flexion, knee flexion, and ankle dorsiflexion. And it's not absolutely required, but what you can do to get more joint dominance in the squat is to use a slant board or a wedge to elevate the heels. More joint dominance allows for more potential of positive adaptations in the structures of the knee joint responsible for longevity. Mistake number three is butt wink. This is not as much as a mistake as it is a reflection of the space in your joints. Just focusing on the hip joint, if you don't have access to the arthrokinematics I just described, an anterior roll and a posterior glide to get that full hip flexion, the body is smart. It's going to get you to the bottom one way or another. And this is instead with the pelvis rolling onto the femur. Alfred's joints don't move, but you can imagine it would look like this bone rolling on this bone, which will get that curvature at the bottom position. That's it. That's all that's really going to happen. It's not something inherently dangerous. As of 2020, one meta-analysis found that there's currently no credible longitudinal or cross-sectional evidence to suggest that a more flexed lumbar spine during lifting is a risk factor for low back pain onset or persistence, or a differentiator of people with and without low back pain. So, solutions for butt wink. Number one, stop stressing about it because it is not dangerous. But if you want more mobility to increase adaptive potential in the structures involved with butt wink, my go-to would be reverse hip thrust to open up the posterior hip capsule, ATG split squat to open up the back hips, anterior hip capsule, elephant walk to open up the nerves and hamstrings behind the hip, and couch stretch to open up the nerves and hip flexors on the front of the hip. And RDO with chains to increase the mind-muscle connection of the muscles around the hip. I mean, you could really just do the RDO, but chains are cool.